Hi there, my name is Andy Burns and welcome to Courtside Podcast. Like you, I'm a fellow sports parent, a fellow courtsider, to be found on our regular weekly pilgrimages, coffee in hand, to watch our children play the sport that they love, the sport that brings them alive. Courtside is going to be a series of conversations exploring the journey that we as sports parents go on as we support our children through the sport that they love. Through Courtside, you're going to hear from players, parents, coaches, experts in the field of sports science and adolescent development in order that we can better create a more positive courtside movement, meaning that our children flourish through the culture we create around the sport that they love. I was advised to go large, advised to go big on my first podcast to make a big splash. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Kris Soutar to be my first guest on the show. Kris is a performance coach with the LTA. He's the founder of Service Box. He has his own podcast called the Kris Soutar Tennis Journal. He's an all-round good guy. So please do sit back and enjoy this conversation. But before we go, two quick things. Firstly, if you enjoy this podcast, please do like, subscribe and comment. All feedback is welcome. Oh, and please also listen out to the theme tune. We hope you love it. Huge thanks has to go out to the Hackney Children's Choir. Kris Soutar, welcome to my very first podcast.
Pleasure, honoured to be your first guest.
Well, there we go. Well, let's see whether when you get to the end, you're still as honoured, and it went as smooth as I hope. So your background, where you are currently is you're an LTA Level 5 Master Performance Head Coach.
Yeah.
You say you're Judy's right hand man, looking after the tennis roadshow. You're a speaker, you're a blogger, you make podcasts, you're a vlogger. What do you do on your Tuesday? That's not too busy a lifestyle.
Tuesday is my hair day. I do my hair all day Tuesday.
So you're very busy, you're very active now. What I'd be interested in is kind of knowing the journey from that led you to what you're doing now and to where you're at now. So kind of I guess my first bit of interest and conversation is what's the journey from you first of all picking up a tennis racket to kind of the work you're involved in now as a coach?
Oh, wow. Well, I first picked up a tennis racket in 1985, and I have a German 17-year-old called Boris Becker to blame for that. I think I tried tennis the summer before when McEnroe destroyed Connors at Wimbledon in the final, but I didn't really get into it. And then for whatever reason, I think Boris was the first person that I ever looked at in sport and kind of thought, like I could do that or wanted to do it. You know, I watched football and all the golf and all the rest of it, but I was never inspired by it. So I started playing in 85, did the usual, played all summer with my pals who played football. And then at the end of the summer, they went back to football, but I still wanted to play tennis, but I didn't know anyone at the club. So I coincidentally, around that time, my mum and dad moved from the other side of the town I grew up in to the tennis club. Literally about 100 yards from the club. So my bedroom window looked out onto the tennis court. So
constantly calling you to play.
Exactly, yeah. The only thing that separated my bedroom and the club was the river of the town.
Yeah.
So I had a bridge I run over and I was at the club. So I kind of joined the season after, and I was one of these kids that would put down tennis tins and try and serve and knock them over. And I just quite often played or practiced by myself, and that got the attention of a few people at the club, and they were quite kind enough to play with me, and from there I then got to know people and probably competed that first year in 1986 and did relatively well. I remember the first tournament I played, I got to the final of that stage, which then allowed me to go to the next stage. It was back in the good old days when you had so many people competing in tennis that you had these tableau draws that fed from one to the other. So I did well, and that got the attention of the local, like the district coach, and then I got into the district session, and it kind of snowballed from there in terms of becoming obsessed with the game. And then it wasn't until I was about 16 that I actually started to compete outside my district, because I didn't really, without going into too many details, I didn't come from a family that traveled a lot in terms of, like what they do now, like
Yep.
you know better than anyone, people now just kind of jump in a car and willy-nilly drive 2-3 hours to a tennis tournament, which would never have even entered my head when I was a kid. But when you're 16, you start thinking, right, I'll get a train or I'll get a bus or I'll hitch a ride with my friends and stuff like that. So I started to compete outside. And that first year was a bit of a learning curve. And then the last year under 18s, I did reasonably well, like top 10 in Scotland in under 18s. And then from there, the kind of thing of, do I go to university or or college or do something in further education? And I never really, again, the path was never really sown for me in that sense.
Yeah.
So I went into coaching, and it was kind of like, let me do it for a year. It was almost a gap year type thing. And I still played a lot of tournaments that year. And ironically, maybe get back to this later on, but ironically, I played my best tennis by miles in those 2 or 3 years after juniors. So I was beating a lot of people that were higher ranked or higher like reps,
Yep.
when I was an adult. But in a way, it was hidden. It never counted for anything because it was just in run-of-the-mill tournaments, which might lead us down another road later on about hierarchy and status and stuff like that. But the coaching really took over. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into.
That'd be great to hear. Great to hear.
Yeah. Well, I did what most coaches do, and I coached anyone and everyone, just all levels. I was under a guy called Robin Kerr, who was kind enough to give me a job and guarantee me £100 a week, which in 1992 was, like, for me, was quite a big deal. And then anything I made on top of that, he said, it's yours. So I did that for maybe a couple of years, and he essentially farmed me out to about 5 or 6 local clubs. And I was doing maybe a night at each of those clubs. And then I started to think about which one of those clubs would be a good place for me to kind of make my mark. So I chose a club called Bankery, which is in Royal Deeside, a very sporty town, very, I would say, affluent, a good commuter town for Aberdeen. And all the local sports clubs were well run, and it was just a natural sporty town. So I kind of targeted them, and I remember standing up at 20 years old at their AGM to suggest that they make me their first ever full-time contracted head coach, give me a retainer. And I remember standing up. Of course, the listeners can't see this, but you'll see it. I'm shaking like a leaf with my piece of paper. And I just remember an old lady getting my attention, and she kind of mouthed to me, "Put the paper down, put your hands behind your back so they can't see you shake."
Yep.
And then I gave my proposal, and they kind of pretty much, I gave this very ambitious thing, and they were like, look, it was almost like, what's the Jerry Maguire, we had you at hello.
Yes.
It was like, I was like, well, you could have told me, it would have saved me like 20 minutes of absolute hell. But I became their head coach and did. I still think, when I think back, it's amongst my favourite coaching memories,
Yes.
is those early days when it's just a big adventure, and to be honest, you don't have a clue what you're doing. I obviously played tennis to an okay level. Like I think to give a context for anyone that knows tennis, I would class myself as like a reasonable county level
Yep.
player. So I played okay. But when sometimes you can be a big fish in a small pond. In the Northeast, there wasn't that many players, so I was probably one of the best players in the Northeast. And I definitely was the best player at that club. So you kind of, you kind of kind of put a plan in place and you crack on, but you don't really know what you're doing. You're just learning as you go along. So I did that for a few years, and that tied in with Westburn Tennis Centre, which is now called Aberdeen Indoor Tennis Centre, opening up about 94, 95-ish. And that also tied in with Judy Murray becoming Scottish national coach.
Yes.
So she was really the first person that I remember in coaching that voiced an opinion of ambition.
Yep.
And that, for me, with the kind of the background that I had, I have a bit of a, excuse the term, but screw you mentality.
Yep.
It's like,
Yep.
if you tell me I can't do something, I'll do it. And I had a lot of that when I was a kid, because I wasn't from a typical tennis background. I didn't start competing until I was 13, and a lot of the kids were like competing from 7, 8,
Yeah.
9, and were from wealthy families. I'm not getting a violin out here, but it's like I had a lot of that. Who are you? What you try to do? Come into our kind of environment, that mentality. So Judy had that kind of spark of, I want to achieve. I think we can create world class or develop world class players out of
Yeah.
Scotland. I was kind of like, yeah, let's go for it.
Bring it
And
on.
yeah, she was kind enough to invite me into her kind of national team. And again, very young, only maybe 23, 24. In the grand scheme of things, didn't have a clue what we were doing. But where Judy was very strategic, shall we say, in how she spent a certain pot of money. We got money from Sport Scotland, about 10 grand, I think it was, every year for about
Yeah.
6 or 7 years. And she picked about 4 or 5 of us to be on this program, CPD program. And we used that money to get experts in every year, maybe 3, 4 times a year. And we would essentially bleed them dry for 3 or 4 days, pick them back on the plane. And then we just crack on, and we'd find our way of using the information and the methods that they'd given us. So that was probably, well, not probably, without a doubt, though, that 6, 7 year period from maybe 23 to
Yeah.
29 was the steepest learning curve that I'd
So
ever been on.
So within that, what is it you think you learnt the most within that you now still use today that translates into how you work today? Because it obviously incubated a significant amount of talented players
Yeah,
and
yeah,
raised Scottish tennis's profile beyond
yeah. I
what it was.
think if I reflect on it, the biggest thing that I would still use today would be that it's to have like an athlete centered approach.
Yeah,
That would be the biggest thing that came out of it. It's all about the athlete. Also, like what we maybe class as an integrated approach, which is that you have to factor everything in. So it's not just the technical, tactical, physical, and mental. It's the lifestyle, the
yeah,
nutrition, the just everything that goes around learning how to travel, how to plan. Because that is something we'd never done before. And so we still look back now. We've still got the Excel spreadsheets, and you think, God, and I actually don't see that many coaches doing it to that level now. But we were kind of, I think when you're in it, you just plow on and you
yeah.
kind of do what you think's right. But um, when you come out of it, that's when you maybe reflect and go, wow, okay, actually that was quite a special time. But yeah, I think that would be the biggest thing that I learned was that uh, athlete centered. It's more about just hitting balls. It's the whole
Yeah.
pack that helps a player, not just in the game, but also after the game.
Yeah.
If and when it comes to an end, because it comes to an end for everyone, it's like how rounded are they? How much perspective do they have?
Yeah.
Do they have an exit plan? Can they use the skills they've learned in tennis in a different area of life? And can tennis still be part of their life forever? Because that, for me, it sounds a bit cheesy, but that for me, it should be the number one goal for all tennis players or coaches, is that in some way tennis always plays a part in that person's life. And
Yes.
it might just be they're a massive fan of tennis. That would be the minimum, that they genuinely love the game. If they have kids, there's zero doubt that their kids are going to get an opportunity to at least experience tennis. And sometimes I think if we lose sight of that, kids might achieve a high level, but if they leave the game bitter about the game,
Yeah.
bitter about what they missed out on, what they could have had, rather than being grateful for what they did get out of it, then it ends up having a negative effect in tennis. So yeah, that
I
would be
know.
the big.
I agree. When I read both Judy and Andy's books, particularly focusing on that period of time, and the thing that I
Yeah,
reflected on the most, because I'm not a coach, so there's
yeah,
all the technical stuff that I'll leave into all of your hands. But the thing that stuck out the most for me was that great sense of camaraderie.
yeah, yeah,
To use very normal language, it sounded like a laugh. There
yeah, yeah.
sounded
It
like there
was.
was weekends and road trips that were
Yeah,
kind of what happened on the road trip stays on the road trip mentality. But I can imagine now that some of these players who are still on the tour, or some of those who maybe didn't get to tour level, but it's still part of their life, they will look back
yeah,
on that and be grateful for it.
yeah,
And there's something that we notice here since we've made our move out to Barcelona. We're part of a particularly larger club,
hmm,
and the age range from little uns hitting large beach balls to try and get coordination
yeah,
through to there's two guys in their late 80s who are still hitting from the baseline,
yeah.
but But it's more than just their tennising technique. It's the fact
Yeah.
that they're howling with laughter as they're playing, and there's people
Yeah,
and just the camaraderie. The tennis
yeah,
has brought more to them than just the
yeah.
ability to hit the ball.
Yeah, definitely. I think the words, there's lots of words that are bandied about now, and I don't think people really sit and take stock about what they mean. But and culture is one of
Yeah,
them. People talk about tennis culture, create a tennis culture in Great Britain, for example. Legacy is another word
yeah,
that is bandied about everywhere. But if we stick with culture, for me, culture is just what the majority of people do.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
culture. So you might have like where you are, the culture might be that you have dinner late,
yeah,
and dinner lasts 3 hours.
yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like it's not like where us, it's dinner's early and we wolf it down in 10 minutes and we don't appreciate what we're eating. We
yeah.
don't socialize. We probably watch TV and so it's just what people do. And in Spain, for example, where you are, tennis is definitely part of the
It is.
culture, or sport is part, but tennis in this case, and it's just what people do,
Yeah,
and it's part of their life. And they may have their social side is attached to tennis, their competition, their friendships, everything is just what they do. So I think that's where going back to your point about the journey, that I said that Bankrate was my
yeah,
favorite time in terms of just doing what I wanted to do and cracking on and having a great time. My favorite period of coaching was that 6 or 7 years where we had that team. And it maybe the outside perception might be it was like we worked together day in and day out, but we didn't. I'm in the northeast of Scotland, say somebody like Leon was in
yeah,
the kind of west, or yeah, I think the west at that time. We had people in the east. We had people, it was about 4 or 5 of us dotted about different places in Scotland. But the thing that we did was we came together, and it might have even just been every couple of weeks for national camps, training days, and then when we went away to tournaments, that was the adventure. That was I don't mind saying this because I think it's been fairly well documented. Scottish flag on the front of the
yeah,
minibus, crossing the border, booing as we crossed the border. It just was almost William Wallace
yeah,
with tennis rackets. We're going to go and conquer, and we just had a great time. And the social side of it off the court was just, if not more important than what they did off the court, because there was no stress. There was no, well, relatively
yeah,
speaking, people put stress on themselves because tennis is a competition, but there was no external
yeah,
expectations because we'd never done it before.
yeah,
And when we do think back, all those players of that period, they still play tennis, they still love tennis. If you see them, it's like an instant hug. It's
yeah.
like just brings back great memories, and I'm not 100% convinced that is the case now with players of this generation. So
No, and that's certainly been Kath, my wife, and I's observations of Elijah will turn up. If I look back in the UK context, he would turn up, he'd play tennis with a couple of lads, but those lads would be doing other sports. And so
yeah,
that's the only time he'd ever see them for that 1.5 hour, 1 hour session.
hmm,
He'd then individually go off and play little tournaments. So,
yeah,
but the moment the club said this is a club match, and we're
yeah,
playing it, he was awake earlier. He wanted to
yeah,
wear his club colours. It was the
yeah,
only time for him he got to wear his shirt, if you like, and
yeah,
say, I'm from, as we were then, Windsor.
yeah,
And then the interesting translation of since we've been here, he won't wear any other tennis top apart from his Barcelona Tennis Academy top because it gives him a sense of identity,
yeah, yeah.
and there's that camaraderie. What? So a question from me as a parent: what do you feel that we could be doing more as parents to create a much more healthier culture, courtside or within our clubs, that nurtures more for our youngsters than just simply they're getting better at their forehand?
Well, I suppose if we start big
Yeah,
and go from there, the first thing is that I genuinely believe our job as a parent, because I'm a parent as well, is to keep things in perspective and make sure that the attachment to tennis is not to their
yeah,
self-worth or their
yes,
self-esteem. So to really use every opportunity, you probably heard me say the snowflake analogy. A snowflake individually is one of the most fragile things that nature has. But if you put enough snowflakes together, it can form a
yes,
snowball, if you roll that snowball in other snow, it will gather size and strength and so on. But it doesn't take much to melt snow.
Yeah.
So I think that our job as parents is to sprinkle snowflakes on them so they don't even know they're landing. You know what I mean? But actually, over time, they form this kind of
It's a good
strength.
analogy.
Yeah, and that could be any time you hear them speaking in a slightly negative way about either themselves or being negative about opponents, or our job is to diffuse that and actually depersonalize it, make them really appreciate that at the end of the day, it's just a game.
Yes.
Now, some people don't like that because, and you know, the area that I'm from, the performance side, if you want to call it that, a lot of people don't like that because they think you're trivializing what you're doing. And I would have been like that 10 years ago if you'd said that to me. But in hindsight, and maybe again because becoming a father 7 years ago for the first time, I now realize that it is just a game.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't define who you are. And then the flip side of that is people would quite often ask, well, if it doesn't define, what do you attach your self-worth to? My personal opinion is that it should be how you are with others.
Yeah.
Now that sounds very cliched and twee, but if you think in tennis, if you make it more specific, you need other people to be the best you can be.
Yeah.
So you have to play with everyone and anyone that will be kind enough to stand at the other side of the court to you and help you get better.
Yes.
And in turn, you help them get better. So I think those are two big things I talk to parents a lot about is, you know, you hear them speaking about rankings and ratings, and then that's when I have to kind of be the snowflake machine, whatever, you know, because the temptation and what I've done before is I've just taken a snowball and chucked it in their face. And that stings for a second and it maybe has an impact, but it doesn't actually seep in. So it's just trying to, you know, depersonalize it, not attach self-worth to the game, be kind, play with everyone, learn from each other, raise the bar, be together.
Yeah.
And then after that, there's a million and one things that parents can do to help support their child. Number one, I suppose you're the living example of that, is provide opportunity. Provide opportunity, I think, personal opinion is within your means, because I see a lot of horrific situations where people are remortgaging, uplifting other siblings out of schools, taking them to other parts of the country or other countries without much thought about on the other sibling. Changing schools, changing social groups, so peers, friends are left, and they're in debt, they're stressed, and that will definitely seep its way through to the child. So create opportunities, make sure it's within your means, and try and be the bumper bowling, if you like. You know, it's not you that rolls the ball or the bowl, it's them. You're the one that just kind of senses things are going a little bit off track. Okay, I'll bring you back in. It's their goal, their ambition, and you support that. As long as they're happy and healthy and really enjoying the experience, then I think that's our main job as parents.
Yeah, exactly. I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine who's got two older girls, and we were just chatting about us moving to Spain, doing this, and he said his reflection was, "I'm really jealous." And I said, "Why?" He says, I said, "You can move to Spain as well if you want to." He said, no, it's not. It's not that at all. It's my two girls are still discovering what either sport or hobby and stuff really brings them alive. Whereas you get the opportunity every week, whether he wins a match or not, to see your boy alive.
Yeah.
And I think for both of us here, we've been encouraged by that kind of line of whenever we watch him play, this is us seeing our son alive. Whereas I guess historically, because we don't have a tennis background, how do you have a barometer as to whether he's growing? Well, it's only if he's winning, which is a wrong metric.
Yeah.
And so the anxiety level would rise for us, kind of, oh, I hope he wins, that kind of anxiety, good old parental projections everywhere. But the minute you started thinking, actually, we are blessed in the one sense of, for the next hour, irrespective of the result, he is fully present, loving what he's doing.
Yeah.
And we've seen him come off the court having, on a score term, been absolutely nailed, absolutely hammered, coming off buzzing, because he knew that player was a better player than him, but it took them a long time to beat me. They couldn't get
Yeah,
past me. And that's a whole different world I'm entering
yeah,
with
yeah,
him.
yeah, massive.
And so trying to change it to, this is an opportunity for me to see him alive and expressing himself, being a joy, instead of
Yeah,
saying, today's only good if he comes away with a medal.
yeah. No, I think that word enjoy, again, 10 years ago, in fact, not even that, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, you could probably even trace it back on social media, God forbid, but I really had an issue with the word fun.
Yeah.
I thought it was derogatory. It took away the importance of what we were trying to achieve, and my definition or perception of fun was kind of clown-like,
Yeah.
unadulterated messing around, and I felt the type of work I was doing that time, it was like it cheapened what I was trying to do, and I had a real issue with it. And again, perspective and kind of that constantly reflecting and learning. Um, I still am not a massive fan of the word fun, if I'm honest, but I love the word enjoy,
Yeah.
and I try and do it literally and split it. It says it is enjoy. So
Yes.
I remember the first time we ever spoke, that was, I think, one of the things we spoke about was Elijah. It's Elijah, isn't it?
Yes, it
Your
is.
son.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that you were courtside watching your son in joy,
Yeah.
which was, I think, I got the feeling the opposite of what was
Yeah.
happening in home,
Yeah.
or like not home,
School,
but
yeah. Something
schooling
like that, yeah.
home. Yeah. So that I think that's what we need to focus on is now it's enjoy working hard, developing your game, and then I suppose that would be another thing that parents could over time learn is how they can monitor that. Now,
Yeah.
coaches, maybe the setup where you are is different, but in the UK, there's less coaches who will travel to
Yeah.
tournaments, and I think it's probably going to get even worse now because of certain things that have happened. And the silver lining of that, if that's not the right expression, but the positive of that longer term, maybe we have an opportunity to empower the parents to actually just be a fact finder. So when they're
Yeah.
at tournaments, it might be that they sit with a pen and paper and they just collate simple little facts that help the coach for the training, and it
Yeah.
could just be as simple as first serve percentage, or what happens after first serve, or what, like if they're working on something specific. So if one of the coaches say, look, we're working on how well Elijah plays with his forehand when he's inside the court, you just, every time he's inside the court, you tally mark, and then if he does some damage, you tally mark that, or you have 3 columns saying that he did some damage, it was just pretty much neutral, or he was in defense after that, and then you just feed that back to the coach, if there can't be there. So I think there's a massive opportunity to educate or help or empower, I think is the best word, parents on how they can do things like
Yes.
that. And the irony will be they will then be focused on a process while their child is focused on a process.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of ironies with that, or is it irony is the right word? There's another word I'm thinking of. It'll come back to me. But it's kind of like the parent wants the kids to be in process
Yeah.
while they're off the court exhibiting all sorts of emotion.
Yes.
I'm like, but it's ironic's not the word. It's a
Yeah,
contradiction.
it's
It's kind
contradictions,
of,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and that's what you have to walk the talk.
I do.
If you want your kid to be in joy and focused on a process and be problem solving in the moment, then you have to exhibit that you can also be
Yes.
process focused. Now, there's all sorts of opinions on that. Some people would say parents shouldn't watch, or you should just be there to support and whatever. But I think there's an opportunity to do a lot of good work in that area.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, at the moment, and I'm very mindful, he's 10, so I'm still
Yeah,
in that semi-cool dad
yeah,
box. I'm
yeah,
aware it might change later. So he always wants me to watch him play, whether it's
yeah,
it's a hit or it's a
yeah,
match. And I think that for me, there's something where coaches can help educate us as parents to
yeah,
help us to know what to notice.
yeah, yeah,
Because as I mentioned, neither of us have a tennis background.
yeah,
So actually getting over the ball over a net is quite impressive. But when I stand with Raf, who's out here, who's one of the coaches, and the last match Elijah played, I'm watching it through parents' eyes and a
yeah,
novice at the sport, with my ear trying to listen to the murmurings that Raf's saying,
Yeah.
and he is noticing stuff that I'm not.
Yeah.
So, for example, it's one resonated with me really well. He hit the net first time on his first serve, and he went for his second one, and he didn't bottle it. He went for it again and hit the net. Now, naturally, I'd have been going, "Oh, he should have done a softer second serve there, mate." Raf was like, "Good confidence, well done." You're like,
Good bravery.
That's right. That's what I should have been watching for.
Yeah.
or he'll go. That's good. Feet, excellent. And you're like, I wasn't even looking at his feet. I'm just trying to see where the ball's going. So it's that whole process thing.
Yeah.
So I guess part of my plea or conversation back to coaches with me is help us to know what we should be looking at.
Yeah.
Particularly those of us who've not played before.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I've said this to you, but I remember when I started doing the talks to parents a few months ago, it just coincided. It was just coincidence that there was a thing going about Facebook, and it was 14 reasons why children drop out of youth sports, you know. And I think about 10 or 11 of them were essentially blaming parents. And something inside me just snapped, which isn't a surprise to people who know me. But I kind of, in my head, I won't tell you the exact language I used, but in my head, I was like, how dare you? Because I know how these things work. It was just an infographic. So somebody has just sat there and made that up. But because they're so well polished, and it looks like it's come from maybe some governing body research study or whatever. And my literal thought was, how dare you? You know, help them. If you genuinely think this or believe this, then actually empower them so that you can work together as a team. And that, I think that's my biggest message to coaches in terms of working with parents, rather than this term that uses like dealing with parents, is keeping them at arm's length. I'm like, are you joking me? You know, if somebody tried to deal with me as a parent of my two children, I'd want to like clothesline them. You know, I'd just be like, what? You know, how dare you? So I think there's a massive opportunity to help. And in terms of the game, it's such a complex game, but like I say, over time you will. You know, there's lots of tennis parents out there that have no tennis background, and their children have gone the journey, and by a certain time, just through osmosis, if that's the right term, they just pick up and they start to see the bigger picture and then the details within that picture. But to start, we can kickstart that and accelerate that, and that's why I've never had an issue with parents being on the court, because I almost train them up as like an assistant, not an assistant coach, because I don't want them to coach, but an assistant observer, if you like. But the hard part is then not relaying the information back to the kid. That is a definite no-go, unless you are in a situation where the parent is the coach. For me, do not feed back any of that information. Greet them with a smile. Focus on things that, you know, like effort, resilience, courage. You know, how well they performed their performance goals, if got any. And maybe at 10 it's a bit too much, but yes, I think massive opportunity to help parents.
I think so. And my background's always been in watching, say, football and stuff, so I'm a very participatory parent or person as I watch a sport. And then you get this whole tension of, so the sport that my son plays, I'm apparently not really allowed to get emotionally involved in. I've got to stay quiet. So if I can't stay quiet watching 11 blokes who I'm not related to kicking a ball around, how am I supposed to stay quiet with the one that I am? And and there's all the parental stuff. You're very proud of them and all those kind of things. And you have anxiety of all those. So I guess for me as a parent, I've had to learn some coping mechanisms that I don't project too much. Some of the stuff I do, it works for me. I will very often kind of, because I have to, because it's just how I do sport, applaud or say well done for the first good shot that's played, and invariably trying to make it the person Elijah's playing against. So then when Elijah does a good shot, that was a good shot. So everyone's aware that I'm celebrating good play as I see it, not just it being one-sided. There were some daft little quirks we did, particularly when he was little, of little nicknames that we would throw at him if we suddenly saw him dropping into the doldrums, that always just made him laugh. And so, but equally, I didn't want to do that too much, because I wanted him to find it in himself to shake it out of him. But when they're 8,
I know. It's like it's such a That's the thing, I suppose, now with the emergence of mini tennis in the last 10,
Yes.
15 years is that, kids, and it's probably one of the reasons I went into coach education, if I'm
Yep.
honest, was I went through that conveyor belt type thing with 3 or 4 generations of tennis
Yep.
players, if you like. And when the last player that I worked with full time went off to American university, I was kind of like, what do I do?
Yep.
Do I go? And I had this moment where I went, do I go back and start with another batch of kids like I'd kind of always done? But then the batch of kids that I'd done the generation before started at 9 or 10.
Yep.
But now with at that time the mini red and whatever, it was like going back to 5. And I just had this moment. I went, no, I'm not going back to work with a bunch of 5-year-olds and
Yep.
spending, because 10 to 18 is still a stretch,
Yep.
but 5 to
Yep.
18, it's like, oh man, that's too much. So I think that keeping things in perspective when they're younger, but all those things you mentioned were great. That I think the best one is support both players,
Yep.
and really make it obvious that you're doing it. Because I don't know if you heard that my last guest, Dan Kiernan, he
Yep.
talked about that a little bit, about how his parents actually did it deliberately. They always sided with the opponent or with the coaches, and it was to kind of make him realize that he had to be maybe accept that and be tougher, or
Yep.
whatever their reasons were. I don't know, but I get that. It takes. If you think the opposite, which is you only support your child and you
Yep.
back them regardless of what happens, that has way more
Exactly.
mental effects.
No, exactly. The the bit I'd love to explore, chat with you, because I heard you speak a couple of weeks ago
Mm.
over in Hackney. Although, as you remember, we didn't quite make it to yours because
That's that. Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
event
We went
organising
for
firm sent
dating.
us to. I think it was an event called Confidence in Dating. So there's me and a tennis coach sat there. I think we're at the wrong event.
Yeah.
I just need to say that just in case the wife listens to this.
Aye.
But you particularly the stuff when I was listening to you particularly struck me was around how you're building confidence
Uh-huh.
in the youngsters, how you're building confidence in the players. You use stuff like empower posing, which I thought
Yeah.
which was great, and you talked a lot about kind of instilling inner voices. Kind
Yeah.
of, can you explore and explain some of those kind of things?
Well, the most common, you talked about empower
Yeah,
posing, which is my
yeah,
personal way of phrasing it, because it's commonly called power posing, and it's still, I don't think it's really that well known, but power posing is essentially putting yourself in physical state where
yeah,
you will feel more powerful. That's the kind of typical, and that's
yeah,
why I don't particularly like it. So in the tennis context, you would hear people say things like, stand like this, be like that, head up, shoulders back, be athletic, be big, all this sort of stuff. And the reason that a lot of coaches say it is because it communicates to your
yeah,
opponent that you're there, you're competing, that they might think they should be tired, and I'm looking down the court. And my thoughts on that, I agree with that, but my thoughts are the reality is most players is that they don't look down the court because they're having this internal battle in their head.
yes,
Of course you want them to do it, but then having researched it a little bit more in the neuroscience kind of side of things, I discovered that these poses that you put yourself in, what they do is they change your brain chemistry. So you will have a rise in testosterone and a lowering of cortisol, which is your stress
yeah,
hormone, which I would liken to squid ink in the brain. So if you are high in cortisol, then you can't think clearly, you can't see what is right in front of your eyes. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons I would talk about these poses, and it's because everything you need to solve any solution or challenge you've got is on the other side of the court.
mm,
But people are not looking down that end of the court. They are just playing in their head. So that could range from incorporating that type of stuff into, let's talk about the match court. It could
yeah,
be in their warm up. It could be before they go on the court. And if you look at players now, like Rafa's probably the best example. Before he goes on the court, remember there was that hilarious clip at Wimbledon where he jumped up and bashed his head.
smacks his head.
Yeah, but he's empowering himself. He's
Yeah,
kind of getting himself in the right state to go on the court and be brave. Because I think testosterone gets a bad rap. If that could,
yeah, yeah,
if
yeah,
that, people think it's like caveman, all that sort of stuff. But it essentially, if you're high in testosterone or the right level of testosterone, you'll be courageous and you'll take risks, and you will be a controlled aggressive. If you are if you're low in cortisol, then you can just simply problem solve and see what's right in front of your face, and maybe consequently enjoy the experience a little bit more. And so it's looking for opportunity to do that. Now, as a father, that's this another snowflake.
Yep.
Because how many kids slouch at the dinner table?
Yep.
How many kids sit on their phones and they're hunched over? How many kids, when they walk, they shuffle their feet or they kind of mope? Especially, you've still got this to come, but teenagers, they're too cool for school, but they actually don't realize that by walking that way, they're not cool.
No.
They look like a victim, if anything. So I think that's kind of one thing I would talk about in terms of, it's kind of, for me, it branches the external and internal feedback. So that would be likened to me externally feeding back to you that I am here and so on. But for me, I think of it more as the benefits of more internal.
Yep.
And then you talked about the internal voices that, yourself, that most, even, let's say, athletes or sports people, their biggest opponent is quite often in their own head. And they will speak to themselves in an awful way. So much so that, the question I ask a lot is, if somebody was stood at the side of the court saying the things that you're thinking, what would you want to do to them? And most of the time, the answer is punch them in the face. And so you are constantly speaking to yourself in a way that if you were a physical being outside yourself, you'd want to punch yourself. So that is madness, and even a tiny child understands that that's not right. But that's not the solution. Is how can they actually change that? Now, over time, and again, it would be maybe different for different ages and stages, but if let's say you went really young, you might give them one thing that you want them to focus on during the match. It could be effort. It could be courage. It could be something that taps into when they're performing, they're going, how am I doing? How am I doing? And they evaluate that. And the bottom line is, if they are speaking to themselves and asking these questions, how's it going? How's it going? Then they cannot be focused on all the drama and all the kind of, and that's the great thing about the neuroscience type stuff, is that if you are truly focused on one thing, then you cannot be focused on another thing. So even multitasking is a myth.
Yep.
You cannot multitask. You can do multiple jobs quickly in sequence, but you can't truly multitask in one given moment. So it's about replacing, like a diet. If you're on a diet and you say, right, I'm trying to give up chocolate, the worst thing I can tell you is don't eat chocolate. What I say is maybe eat some nuts instead, or there has to be a replacement to the thing. And if somebody is thinking negatively, there has to be a replacement for that, which is evaluate this, or think about this, and that's where notes and bags and all that sort of stuff can come in. But that's probably just an overview of it, but you could spend days speaking about.
Because that's been interesting seeing, particularly in the professional side, seeing Andy with his notes in his bag,
Mm.
kind of doing that. And obviously he's well known for talking to himself, but then many players do. And part of me watches a match going, who wouldn't, when it's like 4 hours long and and just going back to something you said, which really caught me, that whole self-evaluate on this match, let's see if I can be braver. Because most of the time the messages seem to be, right, this match, let's improve the backhand.
Yeah.
And then if it's not working that day, the confidence will just drop because the thing I was supposed to be improving in isn't. Whereas if you've got that, let's be more bold today, let's be a bit more creative, then even if the shots aren't working off, there is that inner dialogue of going, but I am being bolder.
Yeah. No, that is, any sports psychologist will tell you that you have to control the controllables, and those things are completely within your control, because it's a genetic personality or mindset, if you like. So you could lose 6-love and still be bold. Now, with the best will in the world, it's pretty hard to sell, but the whole idea is a mindset will lead to you physically and tactically performing in a different way. So by having something big, it seeps down and filters into all sorts of different strands. But if you focus on just one tiny thing, that thing doesn't actually lead to you winning a match. It might lead to you winning a point here or there. But you can. There's all sorts of different things. It depends on the person. It might be that you just want them to be, and girls in general are more task orientated. So it might be they do like the just get behind the ball, get behind the ball early, make sure, execute on the rotation or, whatever it is. They might like that. Boys in general, I find, don't like that sort of stuff. They more like the mindset stuff of be this and show this and feel this and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Just reflecting on that in our context. So he's been playing tennis for a couple of years now. And you get to the point earlier on where he would do anything to get the ball over the net so that he won, whereas the past year's worth of kind of coaching and so, and he still is very young, but anyway, it has been go for it, much more. And so now I watch him play, and it's funny. The thing that resonates in me the most is he doesn't have hit the ball now, which is then a direct correlation to his confidence is higher. Now, hitting the ball hard now doesn't mean that everyone is a perfect topspin right to the back of the court and everyone's kind of straining in to play against him. Some are flying away to be seen in Italy. But the fact he's going for it, and then for me as a parent looking at, and then when he leaves his tennis session, he's going for it at school. He's going for there's this constant go on, have a go. So,
no, I think I've got a good little story about that actually. I remember a young Heather Watson, so she'd maybe been about 12 or 13 at the time, and she was she'd gone to Bollettieri's to train full time. And in typical bitter fashion, people were like, oh, check her, she's gone and doing this. Who does she think she is, kind of thing. Her parents have got their feet completely on the ground. Like her, if you ever get the opportunity to even just say hello to her mother, take it. She's an absolute diamond. And so she comes back for nationals. So of course she's not played, and the ball, like, there's no two ways about it. The balls were spraying everywhere. She was really struggling to have consistency. But Bollettieri has definitely that mindset of commit, go for it. It's all about future. It's not about now and all that sort of stuff. And I remember clearly sitting at the back of the thing, and if I'm honest, I don't mind saying this. British Nationals used to be, in some senses, my least favourite tournament, and in some senses, my favourite. The least favourite was because of the hierarchy and the egos, and people, we used to call it, as like the white shell suit brigade. It was like the coming in with their branded shell suits and shell suits. That's like 80s, isn't it? The track suits, and there was a real arrogance and status thing attached to it. And of course, we'd come down from Scotland and, quite often minibused it or two trains and a taxi kind of thing. And we took pleasure in trying to smash that up. And so much so that the last time I was at British Nationals, I'll get back to the Heather story in a second. The last time I was at British Nationals was, let me think, it was with Johnny O'Mara, who's a 95, so he'd be 23. So it was probably 8 years ago. And if you look at the pictures of me at Nationals, I've got like a floppy Aussie kind of hat, a South African rugby shirt, khaki shorts and sandals on. And that was a screw you to all the people in their tracksuits. So anyway, because of that people were genuinely taking delight in seeing Heather spray the balls left, right, and centre. And I can't even remember how far she got, but she didn't get as far as maybe some people thought she were. But it was the disgust in my mind of adults taking delight in the fact that this kid who has Bollettieri's, all this sort of stuff. And the year after that, in 2006, I was at the Orange Bowl with some of the British players. And I was with an under 12 girl, and Heather was in the under 14s. And even in that short space of time, it had started to click. And she got to the quarterfinals of Orange Bowl, beat Sloane Stephens, who is, very, well, obviously just won the US Open. And it just started to click. and a nicer girl you could not wish to meet than Heather, you know. And I just thought if people had judged her on that 8, 9 months earlier or whatever, or a year earlier, and written her off. Let's say she'd been part of some matrix
Yeah.
funding thing or whatever. Whereas you could see that it took real courage to commit and still miss. It takes more courage to do that
Yep.
than it does to go back into just making the ball. So I remember clearly thinking, good on you, girl, because it must be so tempting in a tournament where a lot of, at that time, funding was attached. And she just thought, no, I'm just going to commit, so go for
And I
it.
think that translates into whenever I see her play, and obviously she always seems to be the phrase we've used a bit in it, enjoy as she plays,
Yeah, yeah,
and there
yeah,
seems to be a real love of playing the game. As
yeah,
a layman, me
yeah.
watching. And then
Mhm.
the camera always pans to a mother who just seems to be delighted seeing her daughter
Yeah,
play
yeah,
tennis.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Brilliant.
and it seems to be that complete, I'm enjoy doing this. I'm
Yeah,
alive doing this. I'm
yeah,
going to go for it. And
yeah, yeah,
she is a pleasure to watch in her game as
yeah,
the way she expresses
yeah.
herself. Yeah.
She's competitive,
Oh yeah,
she's
without a doubt.
very competitive. But yeah, I think she tends to have things in
Yeah.
perspective. I don't, I think she, of course, I don't know her that well, but I know she would be upset if she loses a big match.
Yeah.
Like my feeling is that that match she played 2, 3 years ago against Serena, where she
Mm.
was like 2 points away
Yeah.
from winning. I don't think she would have been in the changing rooms going, "Oh, but I did well." You know what I mean?
No.
I think there would have been some anger there. So she's got a bit of fire inside, but I think she's just. I think a smile goes a long
Yeah.
way, and she's a smiley, natural. She's just a nice,
Yes.
genuine person, which is what you want.
Yeah. Correct. Uh, just last couple of bits I wanted to explore with you,
Mhm.
just to unpack a little bit about your coaching ethos and your culture and what drives you in it. So I wonder whether if I could frame it like this: if our Elijah has been coached by you for 10 years, he doesn't have a I've been coached by Kris T-shirt on, so nobody knows that. It hasn't
Yeah,
hit
yeah, yeah,
social
yeah.
media, but they watch him play. Would there be something about how he expresses himself? Whether the manner he walks onto the court, the way he expresses himself on a court, that someone might say, you can tell he's being coached by Kris. Is there
That's a
something about
great
you?
question. That's a great question because quite often you'll be able to tell a player by which coach or academy they come
Yeah.
from because they'll kind of have a similar game style or
Yep.
maybe even sometimes technique. And it's not a question I've thought about recently, but if I was to choose what I think based on my philosophy and methods, it
Mm.
would be that they are a good problem solver.
Yeah.
So tennis is so demanding in many different ways, but if you just stick to the on court, even the fact that you're hitting this little yellow fuzzy sphere that's bouncy, can take spin, you're hitting it with a trampoline bed inside a stick. And the court is massive, 78 feet long, 27 feet wide for singles. There's so much you can do with a ball that you need to be able to um, handle everything that the opponent can do to you and also give back or be proactive in a lot of cases with this ball. So you need to be skillful and skillful in terms of that just means being
Mm.
able.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to handle everything that the ball can throw at you and also everything you can deliver to the opponent. Tactically, you need to understand what's going on. So that would be if I was watching someone play, it would be the sense of this kid or this player really understands tennis,
It's good.
and they really are playing a game. And that is the sense that I don't get so much now when I watch a lot of junior
Mm.
players. I don't sit and watch them going, they're playing a game, And if you use a crazy analogy, sometimes it's more powerful. If I played you at Connect Four, or two kids played each other at Connect Four, metaphorically, what I think kids are doing is just chucking counters in without thinking about what's just happened before or
Yeah.
what could happen in the future. So they are just chucking them in, and it's like, oh, I won. It's almost that they're not strategically thinking about what is happening and therefore staying with it or changing or adapting what's going on. And I think that if you take that onto the court, there's a lot of good ball hitters on the tennis court, and they look the part and they might be super athletes, but they're not playing the game. Now, I might be doing them a massive disservice, but it doesn't look like they're playing the game. So that would be probably the number one thing, is that if I had an academy, which I don't think might not happen ever again. I don't know, but that would be the thing. It's like, oh, check these guys. These guys really play the game.
That's great. Can you? Well, I wanted to give an opportunity for you to talk a little bit about the service box,
Okay.
and kind of your parent mentoring and
Yeah.
particularly the online offer that you're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you want to explain a little bit of that? Because I wonder whether I'm going to be bold and say there are listeners. I'm going to be bold on my first podcast and say that the listeners might be interested in.
They're all related to us, though.
Yeah, at the moment.
Okay, it's not often I do a plug. So, I about 4 years ago started to do a lot more remote coaching, and the main reason was that it was needed, and I was getting asked a lot for it. I was getting asked a lot for people, for me to help people. Now, most people perceive that you need to be in their company face to face to help them. And I was trying to educate them or raise their awareness that the type of help that they need, I don't need to be there.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of things like this, Skype and FaceTime and emailing and WhatsApping and all the rest of it, set some goals, and we just put an action plan together and cracked on. And it was becoming more and more popular, but it wasn't something that I almost promoted too much in my business. It was kind of I didn't do it as a favor, as in for free. I was charging for it, but it felt a little bit like, yeah, I'll help you, and just kind of with people that I knew already and stuff like that. So I've been doing more and more and more of it, and then the more I start to think, and as you know, I reflect probably too much, but the parent thing as well. I thought there's parents out there that are sometimes literally crying out for help, and I thought, well, I'll start doing it with more parents the last 18 months or so, and the results have been pretty phenomenal in terms of somebody coming to me. So one example that springs to mind, a kid from California that I'd never met before, their coach coincidentally is a guy from Scotland. He was experiencing some issues with anxiety on court, getting really tough on himself, problem behavior, it started to kind of become like bad behavior and stuff. So I did a Skype like this, spoke to the mom and dad, we put some things. I did a lot of things like, I quite like recording videos for people, because I think it's much stronger than an email. So even last week I had somebody, one of the parents, talking and said, my kid is experiencing this on the match court, and I thought, you know what, for the time it'll take me to write an email, I just did a 10-minute video. Hey, and I kind of addressed him. Hey, how you doing? You don't know me, but blah 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 blah. I've been where you've been as well. I've experienced exactly what you do. This is, this will work for you. Try it like this, and talking about a lot of the stuff that we've just talked about. So because of that, maybe about 7-8 months ago, I did a business review. I say a business review. I am my business, but what I did was I put lining paper across my dining table, and I just started to map out everything. And I created my company, the Service Box, because at the time I had a lot of services. At that time, I was still doing performance. I ran a club. I had a shop. I was starting to do coach education, and it was kind of a little bit overwhelming. So I created a company to house all these things, and it kind of sorted my mind out. So I mapped all this stuff out, and this little area of the map kept on almost jumping off the page, and I was like, there's an opportunity to create something that's a bit different. So in a nutshell, my remote mentoring program that I offer for coaches and parents, it's just, if I was to generalize it, if you join it, you've got me in your team. That's kind of the metaphorically what I want people to know, is that I'm in your corner. It's not like it says on the online it's 6 sessions for X price and whatever over three. I kind of want people to commit to a 3 month minimum, because I think one-offs are just like band-aids. They just come off after a couple of washes. So to commit to 3 months, see what we can do in 3 months. And then after that, it's entirely up to you if you want to keep on going. But you've got me in your corner, and it's not just the 6 sessions, it's in between. I use an online kind of essentially a project development software. So we house everything in that software, all the videos, any planning, goal setting, anything can be housed in that. We can have like a little message board where you can say, right, how are we getting on with this? It could just evolve to be housing whatever you want it to be housing. So it's just a way for me to help people, because that's kind of my number one kick, if you like, is that's what I get out of what I do, is helping people. And it's just a way of me doing it so that I don't have to travel, and I can spend more time with my family, and it's adding value, and I'm kind of confident enough to say that it is 100% adding value. Even some of the coaches have just started it, and after one session, 3 of the coaches have said, I would have paid the quarterly amount for that one session.
Right.
And parents are, just to have somebody in your corner, and your setup, it sounds like you're pretty sorted, but a lot of people are not in an environment where they have someone really that's got their back. And it's just the industry has turned into I call it a gig economy, where coaches are doing X amount of gigs a week, and that's their main concern is, do I have enough gigs this week? And it sounds like I'm slating coaches. I'm not, but it's just a kind of it's a way the industry has evolved in the last 10 years or so, that there's not so many coaches, I don't think, getting into it with the genuine feeling of wanting to help. Yeah, so that's I feel slightly bad for saying that, because I know that there's going to be some people listening going, how dare he? So if you're listening and you're taking offense to that, I don't mean you, because if you're taking offense to it, then clearly I don't mean you. But there are a lot of people out there that are, and again, it could be a completely another podcast. It's probably for a different forum, to be honest. But there's a lot of parents out there that require assistance in how they can help their children flourish, not just into the best player, but the best all-round person. Then that can take them through into their career if it's not tennis, and so on. So that's
fully agree. I love the word flourish. And that's just got one last question, but just one comment to that. When he said, if you're a coach who takes offence, that's probably not you, because I've encountered coaches for whom we won't take offence at that. That is them. But I think the reason why the little man loves hitting the ball with such joy is his very first coach, and I'll do a full shout out to Kieran on the first podcast, Kieran Muir. What an exceptional coach he was. A young guy, I don't know his qualifications. I can't comment on that. All I can comment on is that you knew that as a coach he genuinely liked Elijah. And we keep in WhatsApp conversation now that we're out here. He's coming out to visit us after Easter. He wants to see how he's developed and all that. And there is that constant, the thing that made him a great coach. And I'll always say that I can't comment on the techniques. That's not technical. That's not me. Is that Elijah would bounce out the car to see him, would be gutted when he left. And it was a session that was full of all sorts of high fives, and Kieran was interested in how school was and how the rest of his life was. And so it was almost full life coaching happening on the court.
That's it. But there's that expression that's so true, that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I say this to coaches all the time, and I kind of ram it down their throat a little bit. I do not think we can underestimate the power of someone simply wanting to be in our company. And people want to be in your company if they know that you genuinely are interested in them.
Agreed.
And that doesn't need to be in tennis terms. Even and sometimes from a parent's point of view, I think they call it the fridge door syndrome, that if a kid comes home with a drawing from, say, preschool, like little Max, my 3-year-old does, and he comes home and we like go, wow, that's amazing, and we pin it up on the fridge, he attaches his self-worth to that picture. But all you need to do to diffuse that is actually talk about other things.
Yeah.
You go, so what else did you do today?
Exactly.
You know, so a coach, I think we can sometimes miss a trick by not speaking about other things.
Yeah.
And that would be if I don't know a kid, and because I have to work with thousands of people a year and doing what I do, so I have to make a rapport instantly with kids. And of all kids, like 5-year-olds to like 18, 19-year-olds and so on. And if I don't make a rapport about tennis, it's like, all right, big man, how's it going? Into football, are you? I see your football shirt. Yeah, who's your favorite player? And, you know, and it's like, oh, I thought I was going to get tennis rammed down my throat. So they instantly de-stress, and there's a bit of rapport there, you know. So, yeah, I think that it's a massive thing. So, and that point, you made a good point in that it's not an age thing.
No.
Because some people think it's like there's a lot of bitterness about all these young coaches coming in, and they're not, you know, not like I got in it for the reasons I got in it for, and they're just a university student wanting to get pocket money while they go through uni. That's not the case. There are people like that, but there are university students out there that would die for their pupils, you know. So, and there's older people. I'll put myself in that age category. But there's older people that care, and there's older people that don't care. You know, so it's not an age thing.
No, I don't. But we could go off on that.
I know.
And there's all sorts of areas where my mind goes on kind of the intimacy between the coach and the player. I think there's, particularly looking at adolescent development, the coach, if you get the right coach, being that other significant other in your child's life, particularly as I reflect on boys, because, you know, he's most likely going to tell his coach who he fancies before he tells me, because and the joy that I had with Kieran and where we're at right now is we have a set of coaches there who you go, I'm really comfortable that he would talk about his life to you, because I'm glad he's got another significant, responsible, a really aspirational male to look to. Yeah. Sometimes I don't necessarily make that mark. Anyway. Yeah.
I need to just say this because I know some people would listen to that and think something. So for people out there that have daughters,
sorry,
the female, they need the female as well, because there's a lot of issue with that. So
no, I absolutely agree. So last point, is there anything, just in summing up, that you would want to pass on to us as kind of courtside parents? What would be that kind of golden ticket that you'd like to say to us? What would be that one significant point of, as parents, this is what I notice enables your kid to come alive in tennis?
I suppose it would just be a summary of what we said. It would be, if you're a parent listening to this, realize that your child is playing a game. That game does not determine who they are, their self-worth, their self-esteem. Try and create as many opportunities for them to enjoy what they're doing, and I think the parents, we have to enjoy it as well. If we are like, I go to tennis tournaments and I watch parents having virtual nervous breakdowns at the side of the court, and I'm like, you're paying, and you're investing a lot of time to feel like this. And I know there's sometimes no pain, no gain, but if you're a parent, you enjoy the journey yourself, and if you enjoy it, your kid will definitely enjoy it.
Thank you. And on that, we will say huge. Chris, can I thank you for being my first ever interviewee? That's the technical term, isn't it?
My pleasure.
Pleasure. All of the best.
Sure this will do well.
Yes, let's hope so. Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
So welcome to the post-match reflections part of this podcast, an opportunity for my wife and I as courtsiders to reflect on what we've been learning through the conversation that we've just heard, and in particular with Kris. So Kath, what is it for you that you're reflecting on the most from what you heard from Kris?
I think what I really loved is I know that I am the competitive parent out of the two of us, and for me, I cannot not be active on the court side. So to have something that gives me a focus, what I particularly liked was the idea of running a tally score or something that I can focus on in a match. So maybe how many times he does the ball toss for a serve incorrectly or not throws it high enough would be actually something quite positive, as opposed to just being irritated by it, that I can actually focus on that and then have the follow-up conversation. So for me, that's a really useful tip that I can take away that gives me a focus during a match.
Yeah. And I think for me, so much, I'm going to listen to this conversation over and over again, I think. But the one bit that I loved the most was where Kris redefined enjoying the sport for actually players being in joy. And for me, as I watch him, as I get very emotionally involved, because it's my boy playing his sport, instead of me getting the emotionally involved as to is he winning right now, is he on top in the game, but actually to be much more focusing, is he in joy right now? Is he thoroughly loving what he's in? Because sometimes we've watched him play before where he's definitely being beaten, but actually he's loving the fact that it's being hard for the other player to really get past him. So he's loving the wrestle of the game. So I think for me, I'm taking away the most is that when I watch him play, how much am I looking out for him being in joy instead of me hoping that he'll always be winning.
And I think even trying something the other day, I tried with Elijah just before a match, for saying to him, okay, from these words, either being braver or more confident or more creative in a particular aspect of the game, I asked him which one he wants to have a try at, and he'd said he wants to be braver with his serves. So again, that was a really helpful thing for him to focus on and to have in his mind going into a match, as opposed to it being about winning or losing. Absolutely, as a parent, I want him to win, but actually, again, it took that edge away from it all being about that. So that was really, really helpful as a parent to have that as a conversation.
That's great. So much to reflect on. Kris, thank you so much for the time you spent with us in helping us put our very first podcast together. And wherever your courtside adventure is this coming week or weekend, we hope that it is a place that brings you great joy. Please remember, if you enjoyed this podcast, to like, to comment, to subscribe, and we look forward to you joining us next time.
Thank you.